What's up, guys? Welcome back to another video. This is a reaction to the real battle from We Were Soldiers, Drang 65, part 1 of 2. I don't know much about this. I'm assuming based off the name, it's probably to do with... Wait, let me see. The Vietnam War, I think. Does it say? I don't know. I don't actually know, maybe not. But yeah, we're going to just jump into this and see. I don't know. I learned from the reaction that I've done before, Black Hawk Down. It's based off a movie. And I saw the movie pop up on my Netflix a few days ago. And I'm thinking to maybe react to the actual movie. But obviously that wouldn't be able to go to onto the YouTube, I don't think. Maybe it could, but yeah, that would be most likely to go on the Patreon. But maybe it can go on YouTube, I don't know. But yeah, I'm assuming this might be as well, because obviously the first part of the title makes me think that, but I don't actually know. But anyway, we're going to get into this reaction, hopefully going to enjoy, and yeah, we're going to be learning about this one, the Drang in this case, and yeah, let's just jump into this. If you want to see some more of my reactions, like I already mentioned, links are in the description to my Patreon, where you can find many reactions to different things that I can't post to YouTube. But we're going to jump into this and see what this is about.
This video is sponsored by Conflict of Nations, a free...
He loves this, doesn't he? Conflict of Nations. It does look like a good game, to be fair. It does look like a decent little game. Getting his money, you love to see it.
In the morning of the 14th of November 1965, 16 UH-1 helicopters, Hueys, buzz over the treetops of the Central Highlands in Vietnam.
Oh, there we go.
Each carries 5 young men into battle. They're flying into an area where they have only vague intelligence on enemy dispositions and numbers. At the beginning of the US involvement in the Vietnam War, the men have little experience of the larger, fanatical and hard North Vietnamese force that awaits them. 3 weeks earlier, in October, the People's Army of Vietnam, also known as the North Vietnamese Army or NVA, launches a new offensive against the Pleiku province of South Vietnam. NVA Major General Chu Huy Man believes that if he can destroy the South Vietnamese forces in the region, along with any US reinforcements, the NVA can gain control of the Pleiku province. The first complete US division to deploy to Vietnam, the 1st Cavalry Division, has been deployed in the region since September. General Man's forces have completed their trek down the Ho Chi Minh Trail, through Laos and Cambodia, and launch a siege against Plai My, the HQ of the South Vietnamese Army's 2 Corps. However, the siege is a trap, intended to bait a joint US and South Vietnamese armoured column to move to Plai My from Pleiku to relieve the defenders. The NVA's 32nd Regiment sets up an ambush and hits the relief column en route on October the 23rd. Despite giving the column a mauling, the 32nd Regiment sustains heavy casualties. With the Plai My siege also a failure, defeated, the NVA begin a fighting withdrawal to the Cambodian border. While the British and French have successfully employed the concept during the Malayan Emergency and Algeria respectively, helicopter air mobile is an unproven concept within the US military. Major General Harry Kinnard, commander of 1st Cavalry, sees this as an opportunity to demonstrate the potency of his helicopter-borne air cavalry division by hunting down and rapidly deploying infantry against the retreating Vietnamese forces hidden in the forests. To do so is requiring massive use of aviation fuel, and General Westmoreland authorises the 1st Brigade of the 1st Cavalry Division as a high priority for precious fuel logistics in Vietnam. Despite this, the pursuit descends into farce, and after nearly 3 weeks of burning large amounts of aviation fuel, desperately needed elsewhere in the war, 1st Brigade have only achieved small-scale skirmishes and ambushes against the retreating force.
Damn. So it was wasting a lot of things, I don't know. Like he said, could have been used in other situations during the war. And this is for a 3-week period.
Not a knockout blow. Frustrated with the lack of results, Kinnard replaces 1st Brigade with 3rd Brigade on the 9th of November, and with an embarrassing unforeseen NVA attack on the 3rd Brigade CP itself on the 12th, the division desperately needs some kind of result. With 3rd Brigade taking over, intel sharing improves with the division's parent corps, and 3rd Brigade is alerted to a communist assembly area on the Chu Pong mountain to the west, holding at least 3 NVA regiments. Under pressure from the increasingly impatient General Westmoreland, 3rd Brigade Commander Colonel Tim Brown tells 3rd Brigade's 1st Battalion 7th Cavalry Regiment Commander Lieutenant Colonel Hal Moore to take his battalion to search the east edge of Chupong the next day. Only 24 hours later, the helicopters are now approaching the area. US artillery from a nearby temporary firebase opens fire on various clearings in the forest as a deception to any NVA forces watching. As the helicopters close in, the artillery opens fire on the intended landing zone clearing itself, LZ X-ray. A single white phosphorus shell signals the end of the barrage, clearing the first helicopters to land. 16 Hueys deliver 80 men in the first wave, most of Bravo Company and the battalion command group, including Lieutenant Colonel Moore and Sergeant Major Basil Plumley. The clearing is only wide enough to accommodate 5 Hueys at a time. Moore knows the plan is dangerous. He knows that there are likely enemy battalions in the area, but has no idea of the strength of enemy forces in the immediate vicinity. And as the Hueys
Is there something here?
complete their drops, he knows that they now have a 30-minute round trip to collect the next wave of troops and deliver them to his location. Bravo Company moves to the northwest side of the LZ, towards the mountain. Moore sets up his CP in the centre, next to a wide and hard termite mound. General Mann's forces are taken by surprise. A platoon from B Company captures a single enemy soldier
It was a soldier.
close 100 metres to the west of the LZ. Under interrogation, he says there are 3 NVA battalions nearby, and they're very keen to kill Americans. General Mann is probably on the west side of Chupong in Cambodia, and not physically nearby to directly command his troops. He deploys his deputy, Nguyen Hu An, to take direct control, but he won't arrive at the scene for several hours.
Damn.
Not knowing that the Americans were coming, and therefore not knowing where they would land, various regiments are scattered around the area. None have their regimental commanders nearby at the time the first Americans land. Some may be at the central command post with General Mann. The NVA's 9th Battalion of the 66th Regiment is closest to X-Ray, and cautiously advances towards the landing site from the northwest. The 66th Regiment as a whole is the same size as Moore's battalion. Much will depend on how quickly the 66th react to the Americans' presence, before the rest of Moore's battalion can be choppered in. By 12:10 PM, the rest of Bravo Company and Alpha Company have been delivered to LZ X-Ray in 2 further waves of Hueys. Bravo moves northwest, searching for contacts. With only their company commanders present, the NVA's 9th Battalion of the 66th Regiment has massed nearby. With only 2 of his 4 companies at the LZ, Moore aggressively orders Bravo to move up the mountain to clear any resistance, still believing he's conducting an offensive operation.
Oh man, they're surrounded.
Bravo's 2nd platoon moves out, and almost immediately runs into the 66th Regiment's assembly area. A fierce firefight begins, and 2nd platoon is immediately pinned down and cut off from the rest of Bravo Company.
Jeez. Oh my
Bravo's
days.
commander spots and radios back to Moore that there are large numbers of NVA now attacking his position, with his left flank vulnerable. The NVA wastes no time in moving around the southern flank, knowing that the Americans are at their weakest before more reinforcements can arrive.
Bro, what?
Alpha moves forward to Bravo's left flank, and the now arriving C Company moves to a dried up creek bed on the battalion's south flank, under fire as soon as their boots hit the ground, clambering out of the choppers. The pinned down and lost 2nd platoon can't move. Anybody who stands or even crouches is immediately shot by the surrounding enemy they can't see.
Mate.
At last realised
Imagine that you don't even know all the directions and where everyone's the shots are coming from, and you just hear you don't know what the hell you're gonna do. You're surrounded. You got no help coming because they're obviously having to fight people as well. Flipping hell.
the danger of his situation. At 1:45 PM, Moore calls in airstrikes, artillery and Huey-fired rocket barrages on the mountainside behind the front line, desperately trying to hold back the reinforcing 66th Regiment. As the F-100 Super Sabres begin to pound the mountainside with cannon and napalm strikes,
Jeez.
an intimidating 150-man strong NVA assault begins against Charlie Company on the southern flank. The clash results in significant casualties for both sides, with Bravo and Alpha also repelling fierce assaults, also inflicting and taking heavy casualties. Charlie Company is forced to call in close artillery support against the latest mass assault along the creek bed. At 2:40 PM, Moore stops the remaining 8 heli-drops, which would have brought in the much-needed Delta Company. The fire is too heavy around the LZ, and it would be too dangerous. However, at 3 PM the NVA forces temporarily withdraw to regroup, and the Hueys are cleared to land. One helicopter approaches too low to the ground to avoid enemy fire and clips a tree. The airframe crashes into the ground but doesn't explode. The men of Delta Company are okay and emerge to join the fight. Fighting resumes at 3:20. A platoon of Delta Company immediately joins the fight in the southwest where Charlie have been taking massive casualties. The 66th makes a renewed assault on the small Delta contingent. 2 MGs of Alpha Company help to hold off the attack, which nearly breaks a hole through the line. The rest of Delta Company moves to the east and north to finally complete the 360-degree perimeter. At 3:45, Moore orders another push to the lost platoon. Pinned down by an NVA machine gun position, Lieutenant Marm of 2nd Platoon, A Company, fires an LAW and, alone and under fire, charges the nest with grenades.
Oh shit, like that.
He kills 12 at the MG nest. Hit in the jaw and neck, he is later awarded the Medal of Honor.
But he was shot in the jaw and neck and still continued doing this. What the heck, bro? It's insane how you can even, like, your body can be pushed to those limits. Like, me sitting here doing this now, I couldn't imagine that. But I guess this person, years before, maybe before they'd even imagined doing this sort of thing, they would have probably thought the same thing. But then you train for it and then you're working for it. But I don't know. I still think that's just a select few people that could just persevere once something horrible like that's happened to them. Still continue to fight back, and then ended up taking out the whole everyone that was in this bunker, or whatever you want to call it. I can't think of the right name, but no, fair enough.
Alpha and Bravo Company's push doesn't work, however, and they withdraw back to the LZ. As night falls, both sides dig in. Throughout the day there have been 88 US casualties. Skirmishes continue overnight, but Bravo Company's lost platoon repels 3 assaults with the help of an overflying AC-47 fixed-wing gunship. The 2nd Battalion of the 7th and the 2nd Battalion of the 5th Cavalry Regiments are to be lifted to nearby LZ Victor overnight to reinforce Moore's battalion at X-Ray by foot. B-52 strikes from Guam are requested for the next day. Their time on target will be 4 PM. The fighting pauses in the early morning. Day breaks on the 15th of November. At 6:40 AM,
How long were they here for?
Moore deploys a patrol to proceed 200 metres south of their perimeter to find the enemy. They barely make it 50 metres, when their presence triggers another assault by the now larger NVA force.
Oh, mate.
The Vietnamese appear from the tall grass very close to the American line, having crawled through the undergrowth to launch a surprise close quarters attack. While the Vietnamese 9th Division has broken and fled through the night after their losses the day before, the fresh 7th Battalion has now arrived to face Moore's exhausted men. Fire cuts through C Company and into Moore's CP itself. Again, C Company is taking heavy casualties, and the American perimeter is in serious danger of being overrun. Specialist Willard Parrish of C Company finds himself situated between D and C Company lines with his M60 light machine gun. So desperate is their situation, he expends all of his M60 ammunition trying to hold the enemy back. He then stands up with a 45 handgun in each hand and continues to repel the advancing NVA just 20 yards from his foxhole. He would later be awarded a Silver Star. However, the front line to the south continues to collapse.
Jeez.
Just 30 minutes after the fighting began, Moore's forward air controller, Lieutenant Charlie Hastings, senses disaster and instinctively transmits a radio message to his US Air Force counterparts that he hopes will prevent the impending overrun. Each US platoon pops smoke to identify their positions on the ground. Hastings later recalls, "I used the code word Broken Arrow, which meant American unit in contact and in danger of being overrun, and we received all available aircraft in South Vietnam for close air support. We had aircraft stacked up at 1,000 foot intervals from 7,000 to 35,000 feet, each waiting to receive a target and deliver their ordnance." While there would later be confusion over the use of the phrase Broken Arrow, a phrase ordinarily used to indicate an accidental event involving nuclear weapons, it's likely that it is also being used locally in Vietnam as a distress call. The next 3 hours see a massive and decisive use of overwhelming air power, not only against troops overrunning Moore's battalion, but against the North Vietnamese soldiers still making their way over the Chu Pong Massif to join the fight. Among the airstrikes, 3 F-100 Super Sabres dropped 6 napalm canisters and 6 bombs within 100 metres of the front line.
Imagine seeing all of this as one of the Vietnamese soldiers and just still going forward. You're seeing all this firepower and you're still going forward. Like that is blowing my mind.
The same 3 aircraft then rotate in and out, dispensing 2,400 20mm cannon rounds into the NVA troops' overwhelming C Company. The US Air Force, Navy and Marine Corps aircraft pound the enemy from the air, and artillery rains down from above dangerously close to the American troops. With the chaos, smoke, explosions and flame now engulfing the battlefield, a new pair of F-100s scream in towards LZ X-ray. Moore looks up in horror to see the nose of the aircraft pointing straight towards him. He screams at Hastings to call the aircraft off, but it's too late. The leading Super Sabre releases 2 6-foot-long metal canisters that for an eternity tumble around in the air as they fall to the ground. In an instant, everything near the CP burns.
So it took out, it was friendly fire, this flipping hell.
Miracle that only 3 of his men are hit. The second F-100 had heard the radio warning in time, and pulls away without releasing its napalm on Moore's CP itself. Lieutenant Colonel Moore senses that Forward Air Controller Hastings is shocked by what has just happened, and reassures him, "Don't worry about that one, Charlie, just keep them coming." The pounding continues all day.
Man.
The fresh NVA 7th Battalion takes...
Imagine the guilt you would feel. Obviously it's not on purpose, but just imagine the guilt you would feel after something like that. Like,
such overwhelming fire from artillery and airstrikes that, like the 9th Battalion the day before, it has been stopped in its tracks. With a lull in the fighting, Moore requests that a company from 1st Battalion's sister 2nd Battalion be helicoptered in immediately. These fresh infantrymen are deployed to help the heavily battered C Company on the southern perimeter. At noon, the reinforcing 2nd Battalion 5th Cavalry, who had been airlifted to LZ Victor earlier that morning, also arrives to bolster Moore's perimeter. It becomes evident that the balance of power in the area has shifted, and the NVA 7th Battalion has taken such heavy losses from airstrikes that it can no longer continue. With the new US battalion on the scene, and with ground fighting seemingly over for the day, Moore's exhausted battalion prepares for exfil back to base in the afternoon. The B-52 Stratofortress strategic bombers from Guam arrive high overhead at...
How many? There's a good, 15, 20?
At 4 p.m. Several entire map grid areas over the Chu Pong Massif have been marked for destruction, aiming to halt the advance of the NVA's 33rd Regiment.
This might seem really stupid, right? Because I'm going to assume it's to do with the terrain, and it just isn't possible. But how come there was no tanks in this situation here? Because obviously tanks at this point in time, I feel like would have been the most powerful thing you can use. Like in war, tanks were... I think this is sort of the 1960s, I guess, and maybe like before that from like World War I, World War II. They were like the most powerful thing you could use on the ground. So how come they weren't used? Was it because the surrounding area just wasn't possible? Like, I don't know, swamp land, or just the terrain just wasn't correct for the tanks and they just wouldn't be able to function? Or was there other reasons for it? Maybe it's just not possible to get the tanks in this specific location. It would have just been impossible. I don't know, but it's interesting that they just dropped off the people, right? The soldiers.
And the remainder of the 66th to the area. 18 US Air Force B-52Fs drop 900 500-pound bombs across the area. Known as arc-light strikes, the B-52s will return to area bomb the suspected NVA locations every day for 7 days. Over 96 sorties, 5,000 bombs will be dropped.
What?
With a final artillery barrage, the lost 2nd Platoon is rescued at 4:15 p.m. With another smaller skirmish taking place in the early hours of the following morning, the 2-day fight at LZ X-ray has seen 79 Americans killed and 121 wounded. The NVA would estimate their losses at 1,215, predominantly as a result of the massive air campaign waged against them.
That is brutal.
After a brief skirmish the following morning, Moore's men are choppered out of LZ X-ray, leaving battalions from the 5th and 7th Cavalry Regiments on the ground in the area. 3rd Brigade Commander Colonel Brown is worried that further NVA formations are moving into the area and calls for a withdrawal. But General Westmoreland orders the 2 battalions to stay, wanting to avoid giving the appearance of retreat to the NVA and the US press.
And I'm guessing that's what part 2 will be. And I'm guessing it'll be a huge mistake, right?
The fresh battalions are ordered to move out on foot towards LZ Columbus and LZ Albany, both 2 miles away, vacating the area in time for a B-52 strike against Chupong and LZ X-Ray itself the following day. At this moment, General Westmoreland does not yet know how deadly this decision will be, as in the long grass near LZ Albany, an NVA battalion lies in wait.
The thing is, I don't know anything about the war between the US and obviously Vietnam or North Vietnam, so this is all new to me, but it's gonna be horrible, I can just tell. And like I said, is this a film, The Real Battle of We Were Soldiers? That sounds like it was from a film. So I mean, We Were Soldiers, is that a reaction you'd want me to do? I don't know if it'd be possible to get it onto YouTube, but posting it onto the Patreon is something that I could definitely see myself doing. And also Black Hawk Down, I definitely do think I'm gonna react to that, because that whole story was brutal. Like, it was like wild as well. I can't imagine what it would have liked to have been there, but I guess to see it in movie form is 1%. It gives you 1% more insight to how scary it would have been. Obviously, it's no real comparison, but you know what I'm trying to say. But yeah, this is part 1 of Drang 65, and I guess we'll react to the next part tomorrow or whenever. But it's brutal, man. It's absolutely brutal. And yeah, and one thing I do know about this war was, I guess the Vietnamese were very used to the terrain that they lived on, so they knew how to sort of trap the US soldiers in certain ways that they weren't prepared for. But yeah, we're going to say that for, I guess, tomorrow's reaction. But yeah, until next time, peace.